My daughter called me selfish for not signing over my house, then showed up at my door with a moving truck, a notary, and a man I had never met. She said it was for my own good. She said I was too old to live alone. She said I was too old to live alone. She said I needed to be taken care of. What she forgot was that I built that house myself, paid it off in full, and buried my wife in the garden out back. What she didn't know was that I had already spoken to my attorney, changed my locks, and set up a camera that caught every word she said on my front porch. I just smiled when she knocked. I told her to come back Saturday. I had a gift for her. Let me back up. My name is Bernard Okafor. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a structural engineer for the city of Columbus, Ohio. I am not a wealthy man by the standards of people who measure wealth in sports cars and vacation homes, but I am a man who has never owed a dime to anyone since 1994. My house on Clearwater Drive is a 4-bedroom colonial that my wife Adela and I bought the year our daughter Tricia turned 3. We put new floors in ourselves. We repainted every room twice. We planted a magnolia tree in the backyard that now stands taller than the roof. That house is not just property. It is 30 years of my life poured into every corner, every wall, every crooked cabinet hinge I keep. Meaning to fix. Adela passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. She was gone in 11 weeks from diagnosis. I did not have time to prepare, and I did not have time to grieve before Tricia and her husband Donovan started appearing at the house with casseroles I never asked for and questions I was not ready to answer. Questions like, "Are you sure you can manage the yard alone? Are you sure the stairs are safe for you? Dad, have you thought about what happens if you fall?" I told him I was fine. I told him I had friends. I had my routine. I had the Tuesday night poker game with men I had known for 20 years. I told them the house was my home and I intended to stay in it until I died. They nodded and smiled. I thought they understood. I was wrong. The first sign came 14 months ago in February. Tricia called on a Sunday afternoon while I was watching a game. She said Donovan had been doing some research. She used that phrase, doing some research, like it was something noble, like he had been in a library instead of sitting at his kitchen table calculating what my square footage was worth on the current market. She said the Columbus housing market was unusually strong right now. She said my neighborhood had appreciated significantly since I bought in. She said that if I were to sell, I could walk away with somewhere between $400,000 and $450,000 after paying off the remaining property taxes. I said, "Tricia, I am not selling." She said, "Dad, just think about it." I said I had thought about it and the answer was no. She said she would call me later in the week. She did not call later in the week. Donovan did. He called on a Wednesday at 7 in the morning, before I had finished my coffee, and he walked me through what he called the numbers. He talked about assisted living costs, about maintenance costs for older homes, about property tax increases, about the burden of home ownership for a single man my age. He talked for 11 minutes. I counted. At the end, he said, "Bernard, we just want to make sure you're taken care of." I thanked him and hung up. I want to be honest about something. I did not immediately recognize what was happening. I thought my daughter and her husband were being overbearing. I thought they were anxious. I thought grief sometimes makes people controlling because they cannot bear the thought of losing someone else. I gave them the benefit of the doubt for a long time. That was my mistake. I confused love with leverage, and I paid for it. The second sign came 6 months later, in August. I was at my sister Loretta's house for her birthday dinner when Tricia pulled me aside into the hallway. Her voice was low. She said there was something she needed to tell me before I heard it somewhere else. She said she and Donovan had been having a difficult time financially. She said his consulting business had slowed down and some credit card debt had gotten away from them. She said they were not asking for money. She made a point of saying that. They were not asking for money. But she said that if I was open to the idea, she had found a beautiful independent living community in Westerville, about 20 minutes away. And if I moved there, they could sell my house and put the proceeds in a trust that would cover my care costs for the rest of my life. She said it like it was a gift she was offering me. I looked at my daughter in that hallway. She was 41 years old. She had her mother's eyes, and she was standing there telling me that if I handed over the home where her mother died, the money would be managed responsibly, as if I were incapable of managing it myself. I told her I would think about it. I went home that night and I could not sleep. I sat in the kitchen where Adela and I used to drink decaf and talk until midnight, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger yet, more like clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you stop making excuses for someone and finally see the thing for what it is. I called my attorney the next morning. His name is Paul, and he has handled my legal affairs for 18 years. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Bernard, do not sign anything. Do not let them bring a notary to your house. Do not have any financial conversations without me on the line." And then he said, "I want to ask you something. Has anyone had access to your mail recently?" I said I did not think so. He said he wanted me to check. I checked. 3 pieces of mail had been opened and resealed. A statement from my investment account, a letter from the county auditor's office, and something from a real estate attorney I had never contacted. I called the real estate attorney's office. The receptionist told me they had been engaged by Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield to evaluate the estate of Bernard Okafor. The receptionist seemed to realize mid-sentence that she had said something she should not have said. She stopped talking and offered to transfer me to someone else. I thanked her and hung up. Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield. Donovan's last name. My daughter's husband had hired a real estate attorney to evaluate my estate without my knowledge or consent. He had been opening my mail. He had been building a case for a property transfer I had never agreed to, quietly, methodically, while his wife sat across from me at family dinners and told me how much they worried about me. I sat with that information for 2 days before I said anything to Paul. I needed to be sure I was not overreacting. I needed to be sure that the grief and the loneliness of the last 4 years had not made me paranoid. But then I thought about Adela. I thought about what she would have said. She would have said, "Bernard, trust what you know. You are an engineer. You follow evidence." The evidence was clear. I called Paul. I told him about the mail and the real estate attorney. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How do you want to handle this?" I said, "I want to handle it completely." He said he would make some calls. What Paul found in the following 2 weeks was not what I expected. I had braced myself for garden variety opportunism, a son-in-law in debt who saw an easy solution. What we found was more deliberate than that. Donovan had not simply been exploring options. He had been executing a plan. Paul's contact, a forensic accountant named Gary, who specialized in elder financial abuse cases, found that Donovan had obtained a blank power of attorney template, had filled in my name and his as agent, and had made inquiries at 2 separate banks about what documentation would be required to initiate a property transfer on behalf of an elderly parent. He had not yet forged my signature, but he had prepared everything he needed to do so. Gary also found that Donovan's consulting business had not simply slowed down. It had failed. He had defaulted on a small business loan of $90,000 6 months earlier. He owed $42,000 in back taxes. He had 4 credit cards and collections. Tricia's salary as a dental hygienist was covering their rent and their car payments, but there was nothing left over. They were 3 months away from a genuine financial crisis, and the solution they had landed on was my house. I want to say something here because it matters. There was a part of me even then that wanted to help my daughter, not Donovan. But Tricia, she was my child. I changed her diapers. I taught her to ride a bike in this same driveway. When she was 12, she had a bad case of mono, and I sat by her bed for 4 days reading to her because she was too tired to hold a book. I loved her in a way that does not require an explanation to anyone who has ever raised a child. But love does not mean compliance. Love does not mean letting someone treat you like a resource. Adela used to say that the most dangerous kind of manipulation is the kind that comes wrapped in care, because you spend so much energy being grateful for the attention that you never notice the hand in your pocket. I had spent 14 months being grateful. I was done. Paul drafted a cease and desist letter directed at the real estate attorney Donovan had hired. It was factual and specific. It named the unauthorized mail tampering. It named the attempted power of attorney preparation. And it informed the attorney that any further action taken without my explicit written consent would be reported to the Ohio State Bar and the county prosecutor's office, which handles elder financial abuse cases. Paul also helped me set up a security camera on my front porch, a basic doorbell camera that recorded video and audio. In Ohio, only one party needs to consent to a recording. I was the party. I did not tell Tricia any of this. Instead, I called her on a Thursday evening and I said something I had been practicing for 2 days. I said, "Tricia, I have been thinking about what you and Donovan proposed, about the independent living community, about the house. I said I was not ready to make any decisions, but I was open to having a real conversation, the kind where I understand all the details. I said I wanted Donovan to bring all the paperwork he had been looking at so I could review it myself. And I said I wanted to do it on Saturday morning at my house." She went quiet for a second. Then she said, "Okay, Dad, I'm really glad you're being open to this." I said, "Me too." Saturday morning was cold and clear. I had coffee ready and I had Paul on standby, available by phone the moment I needed him. I sat in my usual chair by the window and I waited. They arrived at 10:15. Donovan was carrying a manila folder. He was wearing a collared shirt, the kind of effort people make when they think they're about to close something. Tricia had her hair done. She hugged me at the door. The hug lasted a second longer than usual. The kind of hug that feels like an apology trying to disguise itself as affection. They sat at the kitchen table. Donovan opened the folder. He had printed out information about the Westerville Independent Living Community, a glossy brochure, and a 1-page summary of projected costs. He had also printed a draft agreement for what he called a voluntary property transfer with retained life estate, which meant, in plain English, that I would sign the house over to them but retain the right to live in it until I died. He explained it with great patience, like he was explaining a simple concept to someone who needed extra time. He said it was a win-win. I would have financial security and no maintenance burden. They would have a future asset that would help stabilize their household. He used the phrase, stabilize their household, as if it were neutral language rather than a confession. I listened. I nodded in the places where a man who was considering it would nod. I asked a few questions that kept the conversation moving forward. Tricia sat beside him saying things like, "We've really thought this through, Dad, and it would be such a relief to know you're safe." After about 40 minutes, Donovan said he also had a notary available. A friend of his, someone local. He said if I wanted to take care of the paperwork today, they could be done by noon and we could all go to lunch. A notary. He had brought a notary to my home. He had staged this like a real estate closing. I looked at my daughter. She was looking at the table. She was not looking at me. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and I set my phone on the table. I said, "Before we go any further, there is something I want both of you to hear." I played the recording from Paul's office. Not the whole thing, just the part where Gary, the forensic accountant, explains what Donovan had done. The power of attorney template. The bank inquiries. The mail. It took about 4 minutes. The kitchen was completely quiet. The refrigerator hummed. A car went past outside. When it ended, Donovan said, "That is taken completely out of context." I said, "Donovan, please do not speak to me right now." I looked at Tricia. She had gone pale. She was looking at her husband the way people look at someone they thought they knew. I said, "Tricia, I want to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Did you know?" She did not answer immediately. That was its own kind of answer. She said, "I knew he had been looking into things. I didn't know how far he'd gone." I said, "That is not the same as not knowing." She started to cry. I did not comfort her. I loved her enough not to comfort her in that moment, because comfort would have been a way of telling her that her involvement was forgivable before she had even acknowledged it fully. I just waited. After a minute, she said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We're in real trouble, and I panicked, and I let him handle it, and I should have." I said, "Yes, you should have." Then I asked them both to leave. Donovan stood up fast. He said, "Bernard, you're making a mistake. You're going to need help eventually, and when you do, don't expect us to be there." I said, "I appreciate the honesty. Please take your folder." He took it. They left. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after the door closed. I looked at the magnolia tree through the window. It was bare in the winter, all gray branches and no leaves, but it was still standing. It had been through a lot of winters. It always came back. The week after that conversation, Paul filed a formal complaint against the real estate attorney Donovan had hired, citing unauthorized engagement and potential facilitation of elder financial abuse. The bar inquiry process is slow, but it was on record. Paul also sent a formal letter to Donovan personally, documenting every action he had taken and making clear that any further attempt to access my financial accounts, my mail, or my property without written consent would result in a criminal complaint to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office. Gary, the accountant, gave me a full written report. I kept 2 copies, one at my house, one at Paul's office. And then I did the thing I had been thinking about since that Saturday morning. The thing I had been working toward without quite naming it to myself. I called a financial planner named Eloise, someone Paul had worked with for years. I told her I wanted to restructure my estate, not because I was afraid of what came next, but because I was finally clear on what I wanted. I told her I wanted to establish a revocable living trust in my own name. I wanted the house transferred into that trust, protected from any outside claim or transfer without trustee approval. I told her I wanted to designate 2 charitable beneficiaries, the Habitat for Humanity chapter in Columbus, which would receive a portion of the property value, and a local organization called Safe Harbor, which provides legal assistance to elderly adults facing financial exploitation. My daughter would receive nothing from the estate. That was a decision I did not make in anger. I made it in stillness, in the kitchen, at the table where Adela and I drank decaf and talked about our lives. I made it because I had finally understood what my wife meant about the most dangerous kind of manipulation. And I had finally understood that protecting myself was not a betrayal of love. It was, in fact, the only honest thing left to do. Tricia called me twice in the following month. The first call I let go to voicemail. She said she was sorry, that she had confronted Donovan, that she wanted to talk. The second time I answered, I told her that I loved her and that I was not ready to have a conversation yet. I told her that when I would reach out. I told her that whether or not we found our way back to each other would depend entirely on what she chose to do next, not what she said. She said she understood. She sounded like she did. Donovan did not call. I did not expect him to. Spring came slow this year, the way it does in Ohio, teasing you with 3 warm days and then dropping back to 38 degrees just when you put away your coat. But when it finally arrived, when the magnolia tree started to bud, I was ready for it. I had spent the winter putting new weather stripping on the back door, repainting the hallway, fixing the cabinet hinge I had been meaning to fix for 11 years. Small things. The kind of things that tell a house you are still paying attention. I had my poker game on Tuesdays. I had coffee on Thursday mornings with a man from my old apartment named Wallace, who lost his wife 2 years ago and understood without explanation what it meant to rattle out a quiet house and refuse to let anyone take it from you. I had my engineer's mind, which told me that structures hold when they are built right and maintained honestly, that shortcuts will always show up eventually in the load. And I had Adela's voice in my memory, telling me to trust what I know. What I know is this. I worked for 31 years. I paid my mortgage. I buried my wife. I raised a daughter who lost her way for a while, and I do not know yet whether she will find it again. What I know is that the house on Clearwater Drive belongs to me, and after I am gone, it will belong to people who need it. Not because I was cruel, because I was finally honest. The trust was signed in April. Paul sent me a copy the morning it was filed. I poured myself a cup of coffee, walked out to the backyard, and stood under the magnolia tree. The blossoms had just opened, big and white and almost too bright to look at. The kind of thing that stops you in your tracks and makes you remember that beauty is not something you earn. It is something you protect. I protected mine. That is enough. If you've ever had to make a decision that felt like losing something in order to save yourself, you know exactly what that morning felt like. And if someone in your life is using your love against you, I want you to hear this. The love is real. What they are doing with it is not. Those are two different things, and you are allowed to know the difference. Hit the like button if you believe that respect and honesty are the foundation of every real relationship. Leave a comment below and tell me your story. I read every one, and subscribe if you want to keep hearing stories about the people who refuse to disappear quietly. The morning the trust was filed, I stood under that magnolia tree for a long time. Not because I was celebrating. Not because I had won something. I stood there because I needed to feel the ground under my feet and remember that it was still mine. That I had not let grief make me careless with the things Adela and I spent our lives building. There is a cause to every effect. I know that now in a way I did not know it a year ago. Donovan did not wake up one morning and decide to become the man who forged power of attorney paperwork. That man was built slowly, decision by decision. Each small dishonesty making the next one easier, and I had contributed to the conditions that allowed it, not by being cruel, but by being too willing to assume the best when the evidence was pointing somewhere else. That is a hard thing to admit, but I think honesty about your own role in things is what separates people who learn from hard seasons and people who just get bitter about them. What protected me in the end was not luck. It was paying attention. It was a discipline I built over 31 years of engineering work. The habit of following evidence instead of assumptions, of trusting what the structure is actually doing rather than what you hope it is doing. When Paul asked me to check my mail and I found those opened envelopes, I did not talk myself out of what I was seeing. I let myself see it. That kind of clear-eyed thinking is something you have to practice. It does not come automatically, especially when the person doing the harm is someone you love, and the easiest thing in the world would be to look away. And then there is the question of what you do once you see it clearly. Because seeing the truth and acting on it are two different kinds of courage. I could have confronted Trissa in the hallway at the Reddish birthday dinner. I could have called Donovan and told him I knew. Instead, I waited. I built the case quietly. I let Paul do his work. I set up the camera. I invited them to the table, and I let them show me exactly who they had become before I responded. That patience, that willingness to hold the hard thing inside you without flinching and without rushing, that is something I had to choose every single day for weeks. It did not feel strong in the moment. It felt like sitting very still in a cold room. But it was the right thing. I lost something I cannot get back. Not the house. The house is fine. I lost the version of my daughter I thought I had, the one who would never have sat at my kitchen table while her husband slid a property transfer across to a grieving father. Maybe that daughter still exists somewhere inside the woman who called me twice and said she was sorry. I do not know yet. I am leaving that door open, but I am not standing in the doorway waiting. What I know is that you cannot buy your way into being loved, and you cannot be shamed into giving up what is rightfully yours. Adela used to say that the truest thing about a person comes out under pressure. She was right. The pressure came, and I found out who I was. I found out I was someone who checks the mail, calls his attorney, and stands under a magnolia tree in April, knowing that the ground beneath him is solid. That is enough. That is enough.